Okay, so you're here because, just like us, you're fascinated by like really quickly understanding something really complex.
Absolutely.
And you sent us some material on Bruce Lee's 1 and 3 inch power punch, and I gotta say, like, generating that kind of force from basically zero
It's
distance,
incredible.
it like the stuff of legends, right?
Yeah.
So our goal today is to like dig into those core principles
Yeah.
behind this seemingly impossible ability using that book that you sent us as our guide.
Right.
We really want to understand what makes that kind of concentrated power even possible.
Yeah. And what really gets you right away is how can you generate that kind of significant impact
Yeah.
from such close quarters? I mean, it's just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And that's what the book dives into. And what's so fascinating is the author's perspective that it's not some kind of mystical inborn talent, but a technique that you can learn through really focused training and mental discipline.
Okay, so before we even like think about throwing this punch, the book kind of hits you with these serious
Oh,
warnings.
absolutely. It's critical.
This is not something to play around with.
No, the book starts by making it very clear about the potential for severe harm.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about the real risk of serious injury or even fatality if this kind of power is misdirected.
Yeah.
If it's applied to a person even from a tiny distance,
Hmm.
and it specifically points to vulnerable areas,
Okay.
like the solar plexus, which can cause immediate collapse, the heart, the danger of stopping it, the brain, damage from the shock, the neck, risking hemorrhage,
Mm.
and even the kidneys, which can be destroyed.
It's it's intense to think about just how much force we're actually talking about here.
It is.
And the book stresses that demonstrations should only occur when you have like complete confidence and control, starting with the absolute minimum amount of power.
Right.
It even says that what might seem like a gentle strike can cause the solar plexus to just buckle.
Yeah, and that highlights something really key.
Yeah.
The effectiveness of the punch isn't really about raw strength,
Right.
but more about the precise application of force to very specific points
Right.
that are highly vulnerable.
Yeah.
So, and of course, the caution against practicing on anyone with any kind of lung or heart problem,
Yeah.
that goes without saying. That's absolutely non-negotiable.
So with those very important caveats out of the way, let's get into the punch itself.
Okay.
Now, the book mentions that Bruce Lee kept this technique very private,
Yes.
teaching it to only a select few,
Yeah,
which kind of immediately adds to the mystique of it, right?
it does.
Why do you think he was so selective about who he taught this to?
Well, it really suggests that he recognized just how powerful it was and how potentially dangerous it could be.
Right.
And, he was careful about who he shared it with. But the author of this book actually takes a really interesting approach,
Yeah.
arguing that while it may seem unbelievably complex,
Right.
the power punch is actually achievable with enough dedicated training and, crucially, the right mental focus.
Okay.
So this idea of making it accessible is really key to the book's premise.
Definitely. And it's presented as this valuable tool for self-defense, offering not just a physical advantage, but a real sense of like personal confidence.
I see that, yeah.
Right. Like knowing that you possess that kind of ability could change how you carry yourself.
Definitely.
The book also repeatedly emphasizes this need to thoroughly read and understand all the instructions
Right.
and like the fundamental principles, which feels even more vital given those initial warnings.
Right. It's not about just like copying movements.
Yeah.
It's about really understanding the mechanics and the why behind every single step.
Okay, so the book kicks off with mind development in chapter 1.
Right?
And I gotta admit, I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
I thought we'd be jumping straight into like the physical techniques.
Sure.
So what's the foundational role of this mental development according to the text?
Well, the book makes it clear that mental development is every bit as important as physical training
Okay.
for what they call the floating punch. And it comes down to two key areas:
Mm-hmm.
being able to control and direct your thoughts, and being able to control and direct your breathing.
Okay, so let's unpack that thought control aspect first.
Okay.
So the book talks about, achieving maximum specific focus and eliminating distractions.
Yes.
How do we actually do that?
It introduces something called the letting down exercise, which is designed to cultivate mental stillness.
Okay.
And you're supposed to find a quiet, dimly lit space where you can be undisturbed for about 15 minutes.
Okay.
You should wear loose clothing. Make yourself comfortable.
Right.
Sit or lie down, close your eyes, and then just visualize emptiness, no shapes, no sounds, just pure nothingness.
Wow.
Then you take a deep breath and imagine stepping through a doorway into this mental void.
That sounds pretty intense.
It is. It's like clearing the cache on your computer.
Okay.
You're trying to remove extraneous processes
Got it.
to allow for more focused processing power.
So what's the goal of creating this kind of mental emptiness?
The goal is deep relaxation on both a mental and physical level. And it guides you to focus on consciously relaxing different parts of your body, starting from your head and gradually moving down to your toes.
Okay.
And the goal is to feel a sensation of warmth, comfort, lightness, and even a feeling of floating.
Wow. Okay.
And the book explains that with enough consistent practice, you can learn to access this state of mental relaxation quickly
Right.
in all kinds of situations, not just in a perfectly quiet room.
Right, because you're not always going to be in that perfect environment.
Exactly.
Right.
And so this ability to center yourself and focus your mind on command
Yeah.
seems really essential to channeling that explosive power when you need it.
It makes sense if your mind is like cluttered and racing, it would be really hard to generate that laser focus needed for this technique.
Exactly.
So now the second component of mind development is this controlling and directing your breathing.
Right.
So how does that connect to the power punch?
This is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
The book wants you to think about your muscular power as a form of electrical energy flowing through your body.
Okay.
And so the breathing technique is presented as a way to cultivate and direct that energy.
Okay.
You close your eyes, you inhale deeply through your nose,
Okay.
and as you're inhaling, you visualize drawing in this dynamic and explosive life force,
Wow. Okay.
completely filling your lungs and expanding your whole body.
I can picture that like a wave of energy coming in with each breath.
Exactly.
So then what happens on the exhale?
The exhale is just as important.
Okay.
You breathe out forcefully through your mouth,
Okay.
actively expelling that life force, emptying your lungs completely.
Uh-huh.
And you're visualizing your body becoming hollow.
Wow.
And the emphasis is on repetition and really feeling this dynamic energy moving through your body with each breath.
So it's not just about like the physiological benefits of deep breathing. It's about consciously directing this internal energy
Exactly.
through your breath work.
It's that mind-body connection again.
Right. That's a really cool connection.
Yeah. Okay, so after mind development, the book moves on to physical development in chapter 2.
Yes.
So what are like the key areas that it highlights there?
Chapter 2 gives a really concise list of the primary areas of physical development that are relevant to the floating punch.
Okay.
And those are wrist rolls, tiger push-ups, hand grips, and isometrics, which are exercises where you're tensing your muscles without moving.
Right. Right.
It's worth pointing out that based on what you sent me, the book doesn't go into detail about how to actually do those specific exercises.
Okay.
They're just identified as really important for building the foundation you need to support the technique.
Gotcha. So we understand that physical conditioning is definitely a component,
It is.
but the specifics of the exercises themselves aren't in the materials that we have right now.
Right.
Okay, so then we get an overview of chapters 3 and 4,
Yes,
which is where they seem to detail the floating punch technique.
exactly.
So what are some of the big takeaways from this overview? The overview explains that these chapters focus on actually developing the floating punch.
Okay.
And they emphasize coordination, precise timing, and really being able to feel that application of power.
Okay.
The term floating is really key here, and that refers to the hand and wrist being completely relaxed right up until the moment of impact. And that allows for faster speed and then a sudden tensing to deliver that power.
So it's almost like cracking a whip.
Exactly like that.
Right, where that energy builds up and releases at the tip.
Precisely.
The overview also mentions that the basic stance for the 3-inch floating punch
Yes.
facilitates this forward body torque and an inward strike,
Right.
which is described as causing internal damage.
It is.
So it's not just a straightforward push.
No, it's suggesting that there's a rotational element to it,
Yeah.
like a slight twist of the body, which amplifies the impact even within that incredibly short range
Yeah.
and focuses the force internally rather than just on the surface.
It sounds like the power of the punch is not really about just brute muscular strength.
Exactly. The book really emphasizes that the strength of the punch depends less on exertion
Okay.
and more on a very natural fluid action where every part of the body is working together really efficiently.
Right.
And success really hinges on mastering the right technique
Yeah.
and achieving that coordination.
The overview also mentions like specific training methods,
Yes.
like practicing with hanging paper.
Yeah.
So what's the point of that?
It's all about precision and timing.
Okay.
The goal is to strike the paper with a focused impact without overextending and without making it move too much.
Got it.
So it's about that quick controlled strike with minimal extra movement.
And how do those heavy bag exercises fit into the training?
The heavy bag is used to cultivate the feeling of real power and penetration.
Okay.
And it says that both the 1 and 3-inch punches can be practiced on the heavy bag alongside longer range strikes.
Okay.
But there's another big warning here.
Hmm.
Even short range punches on a heavy bag,
Yeah.
if they're done incorrectly, can very easily lead to wrist injuries.
Wow. So it sounds like it's a step-by-step process
Yeah.
where you start with the mental prep
Right.
and then you move into the physical conditioning.
Yes.
And then you refine that coordination and timing with like lighter targets.
Like paper.
Right, like paper.
Right.
And then you move to developing the sensation of power on a heavy bag,
Precisely.
but always maintaining that level of caution.
Absolutely.
So the overview wraps up by saying that 1 and 3-inch punch
Yes.
should only be attempted for real demonstrations
Yeah,
after
right.
you've achieved mastery of the coordination.
That's right. It really highlights the precision required and the potential for injury if you're not doing it correctly.
Right.
So then we get to chapter 4, which focuses on the floating punch.
Okay.
And it distinguishes between the long-range floating punch, which is over 5 inches,
Right.
and the 1 and 3-inch versions, which are much closer.
Okay. So let's start with the long-range floating punch.
Okay.
What are the key things to understand about that one?
Well, the book defines the long-range floating punch as any strike delivered from a distance greater than 5 inches.
Right.
And it points out that it requires even more precise timing and coordination because of that increased distance.
Right. Of course.
But what's really interesting is that practicing the long-range floating punch is actually a foundation for developing the coordination you need for those really short 1 and 3-inch punches.
So it's like learning to walk before you can run.
Exactly.
It's about like learning to synchronize your body movements and focus your energy over a longer distance
Right.
before you try to do it in such a short range.
Precisely.
Okay, so the book then outlines the general application of the floating punch,
It does.
emphasizing full body coordination,
Mhm.
intense mental focus, and the maximum concentration of energy into the target.
Right.
So you're channeling all of that physical and mental power into your fist.
Into that single moment of impact.
Right at the moment of impact.
It is.
So they're really laying the groundwork here
Absolutely.
for the 3-inch punch.
Yep.
So now let's get to the specifics of setting it up
Okay.
and executing the 3-inch floating punch.
Right.
So can you walk us through the ready position
Sure.
and like the execution as described in the book?
Okay, so you start by standing with your hands hanging loosely at your sides, completely relaxed.
Okay.
Then you raise your forearm and hand straight out in front of you with your fingers extended, lightly touching the target, which the book uses a can as an example.
Okay.
And your elbow is open and relaxed, and your palm is facing inward.
So the contact is very light.
Very light, almost tentative.
Okay, so that's interesting because, that was one of my questions.
Oh.
Like, how can you generate so much power from what seems like a very gentle starting point?
Right.
So what's next?
So the execution involves a very specific sequence of movements.
Okay.
You're maintaining that really light touch on the can without lifting your hand or tensing anything up.
Okay.
And then you move your hand just slightly towards the can. And as your upper knuckles make contact, you suddenly clench your hand into a tight fist. And at the same time, you thrust the lower part of your fist forward,
Okay.
twisting your wrist
Yeah.
and striking the can.
Wow.
And at the same time, you're firming up your whole body, engaging your core and legs for maximum force.
So that sounds like an incredibly fast movement
It is.
and coordinated.
Very much so.
The book emphasizes that the upper knuckle should barely even touch the can
Right.
at the start.
Right.
So where is the power really coming from?
That minimal contact is key.
Yeah.
And the power isn't from pushing the can with your arm strength.
Okay.
It's more about that sudden clenching of the fist and that twisting of the wrist,
Okay.
combined with that tensing of your whole body that generates an internal shock wave.
So it's that whip-like snap
Exactly.
and the full body engagement at the exact moment of impact
Precise.
that creates that force.
Right. The hand doesn't push.
Yep.
It delivers a focused strike.
And it says again that the heavy bag can be used to practice those 4 movements of the long-range floating punch,
It does.
as well as the close-range punches.
Yes, it's all interconnected.
Yeah.
And it's a testament to mastering those basics before attempting more advanced techniques.
So to summarize our deep dive into Bruce Lee's 1 and 3-inch power punch based on the book you shared,
Yes.
it's so much more than just physical strength.
It is.
It's a combination of intensely focused mental energy, incredibly precise body coordination, and these very specific striking techniques.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and like the mental preparation, the
Yeah.
specific breathing exercises
All works together.
to cultivate that internal energy and the relaxed to explosive action of the punch itself. It's really incredible.
It is, and as the book cautions, it's vital to remember the inherent dangers involved.
Right.
This is not a party trick. It demands deep understanding and a commitment to careful training.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
It does.
Considering that emphasis on mental focus
Yeah.
and this concept of energy projection in something that seems purely physical,
Right.
what other feats that we think of as solely physical might actually have a mental component
Oh, that's a good question.
that we don't even realize is there?
Yeah.
Maybe it's something to consider in high-performance sports or artistic performances or even just everyday tasks. How much does our focus and intention actually impact what we're able to do physically?
That's a really profound question.
It is something to think about.
It really highlights how interconnected our minds and bodies are.
Yeah, and it challenges us to look beyond just the physical when considering these amazing feats of skill and power.
I agree.
Well, this has been fascinating. Thanks so much for taking this deep dive with me.
My pleasure.
And thanks to all of you for joining us on the Depth Dive. Until our next exploration, keep those curiosity levels high.
Absolutely.